All right, welcome to our Lecture 2.2 series, Properties of Water. So, as we continue on looking at our levels of organization, we need to understand kind of how water fits into how the molecules that make up our cells, our hormones, and such all rely upon water and why life kind of revolves around water itself. And so to kind of, go and ask this question, what is it about the property of the water that is essential for life? We have to look at the water molecule at the atomic level. So one of the things that we need to know about with water is that, well, it's H2O. So we're dealing with something that is sharing of electrons. So we have two nonmetals, and unfortunately, when we have a covalent bond such as this, we have a situation where our oxygen has a little bit higher of that electronegativity. And so if we kind of imagine, we know that the hydrogen and oxygen has those electrons they're sharing in that electron orbital. And as they're spinning around, oxygen, because it's a bigger atom and has more protons to it, is naturally going to have those electrons closer to it than the hydrogen. And as a result, because those electrons are closer to that oxygen, it's going to end up getting this partial negative charge to it. And as a result, because of that negative charge, it's going to interact with anything that is an ion. Now, if oxygen has a partial negative charge, then my hydrogen, because it doesn't have that influence of that one electron, ends up getting a partial positive charge as a result of it. This little symbol I'm putting here just means partial. And so when we look at a water molecule, we're not only looking at H2O, what we're looking at is something that has a partial positive and partial negative charge to it, and that's going to give water some ability that life has kind of manipulated itself as it's evolved to utilize. So let's see what are these properties, and more importantly, how do we see these properties play out in life around us? All right, so one thing that we need to know about with water is that water loves water, all right? Like dissolves likes. And so when we have two water molecules, those partial positive, let's take a look here. So the partial negative charge of my oxygen is going to be attracted to my partial positive of my hydrogen. And as a result, we're going to end up forming these hydrogen bonds. Now, the hydrogen bonds allow the water molecule to have a lot of different functions, abilities to it that a lot of other liquids, such as, say, alcohol and such, do not have. So some of the properties that we are going to be focusing on that use these hydrogen bonds, remember, because of that partial positive and partial negative, these produce hydrogen bonds and interact with anything that has a particular charge. So we're going to look at cohesion, adhesion, capillary action, high surface tension, universal solvent, its ability to be a low density as a solid, and high specific heat capacity. All right, so two terms that we want to know about, and I'm going to just go ahead and highlight these if you want to highlight along with me: cohesion and adhesion. Now, because water has that ability to bond with itself to form those hydrogen bonds, sometimes you have a situation where you have two water molecules and they end up forming that hydrogen bond between each other. And so that's where we get that cohesion, because they're co-bonding with one another. Now, with adhesion, this is a situation where water is bonding to other things. So, for example, we're going to see in just a moment a situation in capillary action where water may form. This is a side of a plant, or what we call a xylem in plants. And water travels up the xylem. It goes up the plant. And so water, what ends up happening is it forms a hydrogen bond between another molecule. So in this case, water travels up by binding on or forming those hydrogen bonds with other substances. And so adhesion is where you have water bonding to anything other than water itself. And so a lot of situations we see adhesion, such as the graduated cylinder here. So here, the water is making contact with the side of the glass. And so here we have that water interacting with the side of the graduated cylinder. And then here, if you kind of notice this water bug right here, you kind of notice how the feet almost kind of just gently rests on top of the water. And that's doing that because of this water hydrogen bond between them, and it's strong enough to where it can endure a little bit of mass. Now, take note though, how the water bug had to evolve the ability to use this property of water because, well, it had to distribute its weight. This is why its legs are very light and long, so that energy, that mass, I should say, is not breaking that surface tension. And so when we talk about cohesion, go ahead and put this in your notes. This is another way of saying surface tension. This is if you ever have skied before or been tubing before, and you get that little bit of air and you hit the water just right. That surface tension, if it's not broken, you'll feel that cohesion the next day. All right, and so we were talking about just earlier that capillary action, okay? And so capillary action uses both cohesion and adhesion. I'm just going to go ahead and highlight that right here. So capillary action uses both water's ability to form bonds between each other and to the side of different things. So if we kind of focus in right here, we can kind of go and look at that example I was talking about a little bit earlier. So we know that because of gravity, water naturally wants to go downward. So these plants want a few different things to live. Number one, they need water for photosynthesis. Two, they need carbon dioxide from the air. Three, they need nutrients from the ground. But they also need sunlight. And so they're going to grow upward closer to that sunlight because that means more energy. So how do we go and make water go against gravity and travel upward in the tree? And so the tree has special little tubes inside of it, straws, if you will, called xylem and phloems, and they use the property of water forming adhesion or cohesion between two waters. But here we have adhesion, and the water simply breaks and forms the bonds between cohesion and adhesion all the way up to the very top of the tree. This is why oftentimes when you've neglected that plant in the windowsill a little bit too long, it starts to look sad. It's usually the top of the plant that we see wilting the first, just because, well, it doesn't have enough water and enough energy to keep bringing those water molecules up that tree. So again, just like we said, surface tension right here is due to that cohesion. That's the key thing when we talk about surface tension. It's that cohesion, or water to water bond, hydrogen bond. Now, because water, if we kind of pull in to this picture right here, we got to remember this is my oxygen, these are my two hydrogens. And so we got to remember this partial positive is on each of these hydrogens. And on this oxygen, we have a partial negative. So what ends up happening is that because of those slight negative charges, it's going to interact with anything that has an ionic bond. If you kind of recognize this picture right here, you know this is salt. And salt water, for example, well, the salt water dissolves because, well, the sodium atoms are attracted to the partial negative of the oxygen, and the chlorine, which has a negative charge, is attracted to the hydrogen. So they end up forming these weak hydrogen bonds with each other, and that ends up dissolving that main substances. So remember, we use that word polarity because, again, polar means unequal sharing of electrons. So, water is a good dissolver, and it dissolves a lot of different things. And life has utilized that ability of water to take large, complex things and to break them down into smaller things. And as we've learned from our lectures and our labs, that the smaller cells are necessary so that the correct amount of nutrients can reach the full length of the cell. And so making these nutrients, the food that you eat, smaller and more digestible for the cells is a win-win situation. Now, one thing about ice that makes it or water that makes it a little bit different than a lot of other compounds is that water as a solid is actually less dense than liquid. And so this is why that ice floats on top of the water, is because, well, when ice becomes stable, it starts forming these particular bonds. But remember, that movement that's happening in the molecules, as the temperature goes down, it stabilizes those bonds. And what ends up happening is that the bonds put themselves in a particular order. And so that allows the water molecules to be spaced farther apart than they were in liquid molecules. And as a result, these air molecules, such as CO2, nitrogen, those kind of molecules can seep into it, hence making it lighter. And this is why big things like ships can float on water, is because they have enough air to make it buoyant. Well, because of water slowing down its kinetic energy, it's able to hold a structure that allows air to go in, allowing ice to float. Now, why do we care here? Well, this was big, and we'll talk more about this when we get into evolution, but life is able to survive underneath the ice during winter. As temperatures go down, what happens to all those fish that lives in our lakes, ponds, and rivers? Well, the water doesn't actually freeze all the way down to the bottom. Because water floats, the water below the ice remains liquid, and the air in the ice actually acts as an insulator, keeping the water below the ice a little bit higher in temperature than it would otherwise. So life, again, used the ability of water to be lighter as a solid to continue thriving, even though the temperature outside may have dropped. And just like we said, the surface ice insulates the water below, allowing life to survive. And we'll later learn in evolution why, particularly in water, this is going to be important. Now, our planet is mostly made of water. You've learned this in your earlier science classes. Now, what they might not have told you is how important those oceans are to the temperature of our planet. Our planet's temperature is thanks to many different things. The atmosphere locking in heat, but also the oceans holding in some of that heat as well. And so water, life to be able to exist, because it's able to take up a lot of heat, and then during times in which we have our winters or facing away from the sun, that heat is then gradually released by the oceans and able to keep things comfortable. So water's ability to moderate temperature is a huge thing for life at every. Kind of take a look at this next slide for just a second. Water has this unique ability when it's going through its particular state of matter change, going from solid to liquid and liquid to gas, that at certain temperatures it's able to hold energy without doing a particular state of matter change. That water can hold energy for a certain amount of time until it becomes a liquid. And then when it becomes a gas, the gas or the water is able to hold and take more and more energy before it changes into water vapor. It's this process right here, that allows our temperatures on Earth to be comfortable at a single level. All right, and that's going to be the end of our lecture series on properties of water. Feel free to please watch the Properties of Water, the Amoeba Sisters, and just continue on with whatever assignment is assigned next.